Hey and welcome, Hammeh here. Today we'll be rounding up some interesting Overwatch lore tidbits from the last few days that might have slipped under your radar. Over BlizzCon and the last couple of days, a few Overwatch lore and story points for discussion have come up from both Michael Chu and Jeff Kaplan, including a main interesting topic, how Reyes and Morrison, Reaper and Soldier 76's time in Overwatch together may have been a bit different in tone than we'd speculated previously, as well as of course the implications that might have for future story. We'll also have a quick chat about Pharah's dad's name and God programs, what they may and may not be, given a clarification as well. Time codes in the description below if you want to skip around, and anything you read here I will follow up with a Your Theories video at some point in the next week or so. So please do let me know your thoughts and theories, anything you're interested in talking about from lore, Overwatch, BlizzCon and more, and we'll chat about those in a vid next week. I'll be using your comments and thoughts. Big topic of the day first, Jack, Morrison and Gabriel Reyes. Was Reyes actually apparently relieved that Morrison got control of Overwatch, and what could this mean for the story? Well, Twitter user Manolo Autolikescake was part of a group that got to visit Blizzard HQ the other day and have a Q&A with Jeff Kaplan. When Autolikescake asked a question about Reyes and Morrison, Kaplan gave a very detailed response that I'm sharing here. It'll be linked in the description below, but to talk about the main bit of this, Kaplan is saying that a lot of people in the community have speculated or assumed that Reyes and Morrison hate each other because Morrison was given the Strike Commander job and Reyes was overlooked because he was too rogue or maverick in his leadership style. Now there's a reason and a source that has come from that I'm going to talk about after this, and we'll go over why this has been done and maybe what this means for the story. Kaplan then goes on to say, well, Reyes was actually relieved in a lot of ways that Morrison had to have the more political role. These guys loved each other like in a best war buddies kind of way, and it's easier being the number two guy because you're not ultimately accountable for everything. Reyes was relieved, and we're going to show how that relationship actually was Morrison's downfall, because for so long Jack Morrison would actually defend Reyes' questionable actions. And to us that feels more like what would actually happen between real people, unless black and white, this guy's bad, that guy's good kind of thing, because it's ultimately more relatable to all of us as human beings. So it's worth treating this with a pinch of salt. I'm not doubting any of the sources, just until we see it from Michael Chu or hard in print in a comic or something, it won't be sort of canon. But if this is an idea from the Overwatch team as to the way the story might be going with regards to Reyes and Morrison, it's kind of interesting, particularly when you compare it to the previous sources that people have looked at, including myself, to try and sort of speculate this from. Firstly, let's talk about Reyes being relieved. Well, the previous narrative, all we had was from Fading Glory on the trail of Jack Morrison. Now, this was published mid-2015. It was then printed into the Overwatch Collector's Edition sourcebook when Overwatch released in mid-2016. And Olympia Shore of Atlas News, it's a blog-style article that you can still read. I'll link it in the description below as well. It included actually detailed quotes from Dr. Angela Ziegler, or Mercy as we know her. Things like, after Morrison's promotion to Strike Commander, his relationship with Reyes changed. The tension became more pronounced as time went on. I tried to mend things, we all did. Sometimes when the closest bonds break, all you can do is pray you stay out of the crossfire. Now, remember of course, Mercy might not have been part of Overwatch when Morrison was promoted to Strike Commander, assuming that he was promoted to Strike Commander in the early part of the 2 decades of peace that Overwatch brought to the world. What we can certainly say though is that every news station or channel has an angle. Atlas News might be a more sensationalist news channel or not. It might not be the BBC, for example, or the perception of the BBC, but even then every news source has their angles and approach. In the real world you read all news with a pinch of salt and have a look at different sources, just like studying history. Long story short, this could be explained away in universe very easily by just saying Atlas News or Olympia Shore was writing it as more of an expose and got some details wrong. Michael Chu and a lot of the Overwatch team do talk about unreliable narrators. We shouldn't trust everything that everyone says. Perhaps Mercy didn't see the full extent of the relationship, friendship-wise and professionally. She wasn't as close to Gabriel Reyes and Jack Morrison as, say, Anna Amari was. Maybe Anna might have been able to notice and see the friendship breaking down or changing more. Long story short, there are a lot of ways this could be retconned, if you want to call it that, or I think what will happen is just the storyline might be changed without a direct retcon, just by adding extra context and extra information that gives more of a full picture to the story, or gives a different side of it. Remember, of course, that the Fading Glory blog is now 2 years plus old now, and with the cancellation of the 150-page graphic novel First Strike that was going to talk about the early days of Overwatch, this was cancelled late in 2016, late last year. The team have stated on the boards that this was because there was a narrative shift, a change in the way that they wanted to tell the story and the methods that they wanted to use. So if this is going to be realised in the story, I think that this Jeff talking about Reyes and Morrison is another part of that narrative shifting. It does give a bit more context and actually makes a few things like an uprising make a bit more sense. It does explain the attitude that Morrison still has in Uprising shortly before Overwatch's downfall. It also explains Reyes' levity and the seemingly lack of direct animosity between the two in Uprising. For two people who were in theory getting more and more frustrated with each other in Uprising, Morrison seems to be fairly tolerant or sort of trusting of Gabriel's word still. Gabriel's joking around and things. He doesn't seem bitter and consumed with jealousy due to Morrison's promotion in that particular moment. So if you look at Uprising through the veil of this different context that Jeff's talked about, I think that, Jeff coming out and saying this, and Michael Chu comes out and talked about it as well, this direction seems to have already been kind of implemented in Uprising, and maybe we'll see it more in different things that come out. My final thoughts on the whole thing: it's very interesting that Jeff has come out and said this. It is a less cliched, a less black and white, this person's good, that person's bad kind of story setup. And actually, there is again recent grounding for this. If you take a look at the last couple of hero releases, look at Moira and her backstory that we've looked at just from BlizzCon. She is a little bit not black and white in terms of her perception of her research and why she's doing it. If you have a look at Doomfist, now most people would perceive his actions as being terrorist with Talon and evil. He himself sees that he's trying to get humanity stronger through conflict, for example, in a similar way to the way that Moira herself sees herself as unlocking the next stage of human evolution. These people, in their own perspectives, as the Overwatch team said, are heroes of their own stories, even if other people would perceive them as otherwise. So Moira, for example, sees, moving the human race forward as being perhaps more important than anything else, her ends justifying her means in her own worldview and so forth. So with the recent trend of Overwatch storytelling and philosophy, that kind of adds up. Now what it leaves us wondering, of course, the big question is, if we're not blaming the somewhat simplistic Reyes wants revenge due to being overlooked storyline that we sort of thought of previously from Fading Glory, the blog. Many TV series, films and books have got by on less plot though, of course. But yeah, if the revenge or anger at being overlooked is sort of not the reason, then why has Reyes gone down the route he's gone down, and what have been the factors that have caused him to become the Reaper, the kind of creature? Why has Moira experimented him? Why has he allowed this, as we've seen from Moira's origin trailer? How has he gone down this route that he's gone down to become what he is today? That's going to be a fascinating story, and I can't wait to hear more about it, hopefully in the year to come. So what do you think about this potential change of approach, or if it's not a change, then let's call it a clarification of the approach that might be taken by the Overwatch team with the story of Reyes and Morrison, of Reaper and Soldier 76? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. Please do let me know, and as I've said with everything here, I'll be taking your comments, theories and thoughts, and we'll be putting them together in a lore reaction series next week. Okay, a final couple of tidbits of information for you. Now, a clarification from Michael Chu recently said that God programs, or the phrase, should be seen as sort of being more kind of local slang or a local catchphrase, a description of Anubis in Pharah's comic mission statement, rather than the class of program in the Overwatch world in itself. Now, this has been said before, I think, at least once. The reason for this is, I would assume, I would speculate, pushing away the God program reference as being a direct cause of the First Omnic Crisis on its own. I mean, sure, they exist in the comic, and Anubis existed. It had functionality that managed to cause a lot of people a lot of trouble. Even in the present day, Pharah's squad got pretty cut up trying to deal with this thing and contain it, shortly by putting a rocket to its face. It could still be involved, and Anubis could be involved, or artificial intelligence that had the abilities that Anubis had in some capability could be involved in the reasons for the First Omnic Crisis, but by not making them sort of a class or a sort of global thing on their own, or maybe in the clarifications pushing away from that, it's taking away them as being sort of a big reason on their own or of themselves, or indeed a class of things in themselves. Anubis presumably isn't a one-off, but there might not be 50 different Anubises in different forms around the world, for example, or there might not have been in the past. I think that's the point that they're trying to make. And with that, the causes of the First Omnic Crisis are still a mystery to us, so God programs, or if they're not a class of things in themselves, things like Anubis could have been involved, but who was pulling the strings, who was pulling the trigger? Is the Sombra conspiracy with the eye in the middle of it still going to be the thing now, recently with Sombra's release last year? Is this the new direction that the plot's going? I would love to see more about this as well in 2018. It's going to be an exciting year ahead, I think. Last but not least, Pharah's dad's name. Well, in the United Nations of Overwatch, the voice actors panel that's been so popular the last two BlizzCons, as Pharah and Ana's voice actors were there, Jen Cohen and Aisha Salim, Michael Chu came out and said that Sam is Pharah's dad's name. So there we go. It didn't seem to be said in a jokey way on the panel, although it was, of course, sort of a thing that kind of just popped up and being talked about. So who knows? Maybe he's a Sam. But if so, we've certainly seen Sam, we can call him that for now, in the little Arna spray in Uprising, which was really cool, and also in the Reflections comic of last year. I am really crossing my fingers for another cool sort of slice of life comic for Overwatch this year, seeing what all the heroes are up to, so fingers crossed we're going to see that in the coming weeks ahead. Hope you enjoyed this vid. What do you think of everything that we've talked about? Do let me know in the comments below. Throw a like, subscribe if you enjoyed, really helps me out, and of course if you like Overwatch lore, story and speculation and theory, please do check out my playlists here. Cheers for tuning in. I've been Hammeh. Take it easy.